find it very interesting that out of all the Sonic characters that exist, the only two characters that have stayed consistent is Shadow and Maria. Think about it. Out of all the Sonic characters that have existed, they've barely had their backstories retconned or changed throughout the years. Shadow and Maria's backstory has been pretty consistent in almost nearly every iteration, besides Sonic Boom, of course. You know, in the IDW comics, the Archie comics, the Sonic.EXE anime show. Shadow and Maria have been an integral part of each other's backstory and the whole Sonic mythos as a whole. Maria is so integral to Shadow's backstory that they keep on referencing it till this day, and just very recently in Sonic.EXE Shadow Generations, which was a big part of that story. But I wanted to discuss something that I think is really interesting because people on Twitter recently have been talking about what direction to take with Shadow's character, you know? He's been in sort of a lost state for a couple years, and quite recently the character's gone back on track, so a lot of people have been questioning what they should do with the character. And the one thing that stayed consistent online, the one thing that a lot of people don't want to see anymore with Shadow is not the angst, it's not, you know, the edgy humor, it's Maria. People don't want to see Maria anymore. And I find that really interesting because it raises the question, have we had too much of Maria in a lot of Sonic media recently? Now, they've used her really well in a lot of modern things very recently, right? Like in the third Sonic movie, for example, Maria and Shadow's relationship is completely different in that story, in the sense that Shadow doesn't come to the conclusion to help Sonic and his friends because of not only just Maria's influence. It's not because of some promise that he made to her in order to protect humanity or something like that. No, Shadow comes to that conclusion himself because of the way Maria treated him, you know, during the events of the third Sonic movie. I think that's a great way to push Shadow's character further and differentiate him from his game counterpart while still maintaining the importance of Maria in Shadow's backstory, or even in Sonic and Shadow Generations. You know, two great examples about how Maria was used in two different mediums. Maria was used in that story in order for Shadow to get over his loss, to get over the tragedy he experienced on the Space Colony arc. So, till this day, he still feels guilty about what happened with Maria and, to a way, blames himself for it. And I really liked how in that story, Shadow finally got to say goodbye. He finally had an opportunity to clear the air with her. And it was such a great moment that when he shed his tear and it landed on Rouge's face, it was a really heart-palpitating moment. It felt vindicated as a fan of Shadow to finally see him get through this trauma that has been a part of his psyche for so long. But then now that begs the question, do we need any more Maria? I reckon we're going to be fine. Now, would I like to see more Maria and Shadow lore in the Space Colony arc? Yeah, duh. Of course I would love to see that. That's why I really like the new manga series that they're doing with Shadow at the moment, where they're actually exploring their relationship more. And that's what I really enjoyed about the Dark Beginnings, you know, the animated series that Sega did for a bit for Sonic and Shadow Generations, because it explored a bit more of Maria and Shadow in the Space Colony arc. That sort of thing is really cool and adds a lot more lore to the characters. Even in the Gerald Journal, they added more to Maria's backstory, with her being the one to name Shadow. Even though it's a really corny reason, I really liked the reasoning that they had for it, and that she was the one who designed the rocket shoes. I'm a sucker for lore like that. But I think, honestly, if we don't see Maria anymore in any of, you know, the modern games or anything that comes out very recently, I honestly wouldn't mind at all. In fact, I'd be very curious to see what they do with Shadow here. Now, it's very interesting to say, right? Because we already know what happened with Shadow's character after Sonic Shadow Generations, because events like Sonic Forces, Sonic Frontiers, all those other games happen afterwards. But Shadow's character is already very different, right? But I think what's happened now, right? We're seeing a paradigm shift in the way Shadow's been written recently, right? Because the way Shadow was written in Sonic Shadow Generations is the most in-character Shadow has been in years, right? I think it's no secret that Shadow's been very different recently in a lot of different medium, you know? Compare how he was in the Zombart arc in comparison to how he was during the events of Sonic Adventure 2. They don't act like the same character, you know? Shadow, at the end of the day, is someone that wouldn't admit it, but he genuinely cares about all of his friends. He cares about Sonic, he cares about Rouge, he cares about all those other people. And that's why he helps them out in whatever situation that they're in, because that's simply the guy he is. Maria's influence is so integral to his psyche that he would just want to help people no matter what. And he's genuinely a good guy when he wants to be, right? But Shadow recently has been very depicted as sort of this, you know, arrogant, you know, loner type character, you know, to stay true to the edgy archetype. And now that's sort of different. Sonic and Shadow Generations is the latest Shadow game that's come out. And that presented a very in-character take on Shadow. So I think whatever restrictions or whatever's been happening behind the scenes in regards to how Shadow's character should be done has now been lifted. I reckon they could take more risks now. And I would like to explore who Shadow is beyond Maria for a change. Not focus so much on the angst, but sort of what kind of identity does he form for himself after this, right? What type of things would he be into in life? You know, like, does he like knitting? Does he like video gaming? You know, something like that. I think it'd be very interesting to explore different character quirks about Shadow. But I think I'm honestly okay with no more Maria stuff because it finally gives the writers an opportunity to do something different with Shadow. Like imagine doing a new Shadow game, for example, right? One that isn't Shadow Generations or one that doesn't bring back Black Doom. Imagine a new villain. What route could you take with Shadow at that point? I think that'd be very interesting to explore, and I would really love to see that in future Sonic material, right? Overall, I'm very optimistic about Shadow's future because even though I think it is time to stop harping on Maria so much, I think it also spells a bright future for the Sonic franchise because the storytelling in the games has improved so much over the years. It's gotten a lot better recently, and especially with the characterization of a lot of characters. You know, Sonic, Amy, Tails, and Knuckles were so well portrayed in Sonic Frontiers. They're the best those characters have been, you know, in years. I love how they finally focused on Knuckles' sense of loneliness, the idea that he's the only echidna left in the world. Then you have Tails exploring his relationship with Sonic, but also trying to be more independent. And same with Amy, you know, all these characters are finally going on a route that I think is going to benefit all of them in the future, and I just can't wait to see. And I would love to see that for Shadow. Now, on a completely odd, like not related topic, when it comes to Shadow in my videos in regards to the Maria stuff, do I believe that same aspect? I do have a few things for Maria planned in my videos, but it's for a very specific purpose, and I can't wait for you guys to see it. But I do think in the video games and in a lot of other material, I would like to see Shadow form his own identity and sort of craft this own type of personality for himself. I think it'd be really great to see. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Do you think that Maria's been overused recently? Would you like to see more Maria stories? Or do you think Maria is actually underutilized? Would you like to see more? I'd be very curious to hear you guys' thoughts. Maria, to me, overall, I really like her as sort of a stepping stone for Shadow's character. I don't really see her as her own independent person, per se, but rather a plot device. But there's nothing wrong with that, right? But she serves a very integral purpose where Maria was the first human introduced in Shadow's life. And the acts of kindness, you know, sharing and caring, all that's very important in bringing up somebody when, you know, they're first born into this world, because whoever they're exposed to, whatever media or whatever people they're exposed to will determine their personality later on in life. And Maria was that kind soul that guided Shadow towards the right path, you know? And regardless of whether or not she's an actual defined character or not, doesn't matter to me, because I think in general, who she is and what she represents to Shadow's character is, to me, more important than what they could have ever done with just another developed character. As long as they can keep those core elements alive in whatever iteration of Maria they do, then I'd be really happy. But overall, I think I'd be curious to see what comes next, because I think there's a lot of opportunity to do something new, and I just can't wait to see it.